So, when I was 15, I was stuck babysitting my little cousin at his place. It's a night I definitely won't forget. It started out totally normal, like any other evening. My mom and aunt were all hyped to go shopping, hitting the stores for some sweet deals. Meanwhile, my dad and uncle decided on a movie night, chilling in the theater. It was a pretty chill afternoon, and my cousin and I were hanging out in the living room. We were sprawled on this super comfy couch, the late afternoon sun flooding the room with this warm, golden light. The TV was on, blaring some cartoon he was into, but I was totally zoned out. Something just felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. The house was nice, you know? It had that cozy, homey vibe. And my cousin wasn't being a brat or anything. He was just cracking up at the cartoon. But this weird feeling just wouldn't shake. I decided to get up and check the back door, for no real reason. But as soon as I locked it, I felt this wave of relief. Like I just dodged something. Walking back through the kitchen, heading back to the living room, that's when I saw him. A guy was just standing there outside, staring through the window. He was completely focused on what was going on inside. He looked rough, like he hadn't showered or eaten in ages, maybe even weeks. His clothes were ripped and dirty, hanging off him. His hair was a greasy mess, and his eyes, they were glued to my cousin. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. What was this guy doing? Why was he staring at my cousin like that? My first instinct was to just pretend I hadn't seen him. I didn't want to freak my cousin out. I slowly backed into the living room, took a deep breath to steady myself, and put on my best fake smile. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's getting late. Let's head upstairs. Your mom probably won't be happy if you stay up too late." He whined a bit, saying he wasn't tired, but I managed to coax him upstairs. I tucked him into bed, making sure he was snug and warm, and told him I'd be right outside. "Just close your eyes for a bit, okay?" He nodded, thankfully not asking too many questions. As soon as he was settled, I bolted back downstairs. My heart was pounding like crazy. I swear it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I grabbed the first thing I could find in the kitchen, a meat tenderizer. Not exactly a weapon of choice, but it was something. I went back to the window where I'd first seen him. He was gone. Vanished. It was creepy. A wave of panic washed over me. Where the heck did he go? I rushed to the front door, double-checking all the locks. Deadbolt, doorknob, everything was secure. I ran back to the kitchen and checked the back door again. Still locked. But I couldn't shake the feeling he was still out there, watching me. I went back upstairs and camped out right outside my cousin's bedroom door, clutching that meat tenderizer like my life depended on it. My knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. It felt both comforting and terrifying. My cousin peeked out from under the covers, looking confused. "It's nothing," I whispered. "Just keep it down, okay?" He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes now. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. They said they'd send someone, but it would take about 30 minutes. After hanging up, I called my dad. He and my uncle were at the movies, about 45 minutes away. They said they'd leave right away, but I had this sinking feeling they wouldn't make it in time if anything went down. Then I heard it, the shattering of glass. It echoed through the house, sharp and sudden. A chill ran down my spine, and my heart went into overdrive. Heavy footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and deliberate, like someone was trying to be intimidating. Someone was inside. I looked at my cousin. Stay under the covers. Stay quiet. His eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded and did as I said. The footsteps moved through the house, the old wooden floorboards groaning under the weight. I could hear the guy breathing, heavy, uneven breaths like a storm outside. He was checking out the downstairs rooms, opening doors, moving things around. Then, I heard him coming up the stairs. Each step was like a thunderclap in my ears. I pressed myself against the door, trying to be as quiet as possible. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. A moment of dead silence. I held my breath. The doorknob rattled, but he didn't try to open it. He kept going, checking the other rooms upstairs, the bathroom, my aunt and uncle's room. Then, just like that, I heard him going back downstairs. I stayed frozen, holding my breath, a mix of terror and anticipation churning in my stomach. Then another sound, the basement door creaking open. He was down there now. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My legs were cramping from standing there, but I was too scared to move. Finally, after what felt like forever, I heard the distant wail of sirens. The police burst into the house shouting orders, searching every room. A wave of relief washed over me when I heard them say they had him. When I finally opened the door, one of the officers was standing at the top of the stairs, holding the guy. He looked even worse up close, disheveled, wild-eyed, mumbling to himself. The officer told us later that he'd escaped from a mental hospital miles away and had been wandering around for weeks, breaking into houses. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even after my parents and uncle got home, even after the police left, I was wide awake, listening to every little sound. That image of the man at the window kept replaying in my head. I haven't babysat since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. Now, before we move on to the next story, if you're new to the channel and enjoyed this one, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out and lets us know you want to hear more stories like this. Your support means a lot. So, if you're interested in more chilling tales, hit that subscribe button. And with that said, let's get into our next story. Growing up in that tiny Ohio town was like living in a fishbowl. Everyone knew everyone else's business. My mom used to joke that our town had fewer residents than her high school graduating class back in the city. It was the kind of place where crickets were the loudest thing at night, which is probably why my parents thought nothing of leaving me and my older sibling home alone. I was this little 7-year-old and my sibling was maybe 14 or 15. They were in the doghouse for some minor offense, probably sassing my dad or forgetting some chore. Whatever it was, the punishment was severe. Both the house phone and their cell were locked away in my dad's gun safe. My sibling was fuming, and honestly, I was pretty bummed too. No phone meant no way to call for help if we needed it. Luckily, my grandparents lived just down the street, and my great-grandma had her own little place on their property. That night, my parents were popping over to check on her since my grandparents were out of town. They promised they'd be back soon with pizza, which, let's be real, was the perfect bribe to keep us happy. After they left, my sibling and I dove into some video games. Time ticked by, and we started getting hungry. It felt like my parents had been gone for ages, and I started getting antsy about when they'd return. Then, knock, knock, knock. I perked up, thinking it was my parents with the promised pizza feast, and I raced downstairs, my sibling hot on my heels, after pausing the game. Our front door had this huge window, so I could see who was on the other side. It wasn't my parents, it was a man. He was tall and lanky with short black hair and this rough, scruffy facial hair. He looked to be in his mid-20s, way older than anyone I usually saw wandering around our town. And in our town, you knew everyone. I'd never seen this guy before in my life. I froze, a weird mix of confusion and unease bubbling up inside me. I held up a finger like 1 sec and yanked the curtain closed. When I turned around, my sibling was just staring at the door, their face white as a sheet. I could tell they'd seen him too. Before either of us could even whisper a word, the knocking escalated into a full-on pounding. The door rattled in its frame as the man grabbed the handle and started shaking it violently. The noise echoed through the whole house, and my heart started hammering against my ribs with every bang. "Come on!" my sibling hissed, grabbing my hand and dragging me into the kitchen. They darted to a drawer, yanking it open and grabbing a knife. The first one they picked up snapped in their hand. It was this old, flimsy thing. Without missing a beat, they grabbed another one, a much sturdier knife. I clung to their arm as they pulled me into the laundry room, where we huddled behind the washing machine. We were pressed together, holding our breath. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It sounded like he was trying to kick it down. My sibling whispered for me to be quiet, and I just nodded, too scared to even think about crying. Minutes crawled by like hours. The banging was so deafening, I was convinced the door was about to splinter open any second. And then it did. I heard the front door groan open and footsteps echoed in the hallway. My siblings' grip on the knife tightened. They were poised to jump up and defend me if the man found us. My heart was going a mile a minute. I thought it was going to explode, but instead of the man, it was our mom. She rounded the corner, balancing 2 pizza boxes, and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw us huddled on the floor. Her face was a mask of confusion. "What are you two doing down there?" she asked, setting the pizzas down on the counter. We scrambled to our feet, still shaking and clinging to each other. I tried to explain about the man, but the words came out in a jumbled mess. My sibling managed to piece together what had happened. The banging, the shaking, the trying to get in. But my mom just laughed it off. "Oh, that guy? Your dad's outside talking to him. He's a mechanic. He was asking about the old car in the driveway." My sibling and I exchanged a bewildered look. The car didn't even have a for sale sign. Why would someone come by so late and act like that just to ask about it? Seeing our doubtful faces, my mom tried to reassure us. "He didn't mean to scare you. He said he was sorry." She gave us both a hug and promised the phones wouldn't be locked up again when they went out. We spent the rest of the night eating pizza, but the mood was definitely off. As a kid, I trusted my mom's judgment. If she said the guy was harmless, then he probably was, right? But now that I'm older, I can't help but replay that night in my head. Why would a grown man pound on the door like that, shaking the handle so aggressively, if he just wanted to chat about a car? Why didn't he just leave when no one answered? And why so late at night? It wasn't just weird, it felt wrong. The more I think about it, the more I realize how incredibly lucky we were. If my parents hadn't come home when they did, who knows what might have happened. My sibling was incredibly brave that night, way braver than I was. But we were just kids. We wouldn't have stood a chance if that man had gotten inside. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I can't shake the feeling that we were in real danger that night. And that's the scariest part, knowing how close we came to something truly terrible. I never imagined anything like this would happen to me. I live way out in the sticks, miles from civilization, no neighbors for ages. And honestly, I love it. It's usually so quiet, so peaceful, so predictable, until it wasn't. I was out on my back porch that morning, nursing my usual cup of coffee. The air had that bite to it, the kind of crispness where you can see your breath puff out if the sun hasn't fully warmed things up yet. My house backs right up against this thick wall of woods, which is a big reason I bought the place. It feels like you're in your own little world, totally secluded. The trees were swaying gently in the breeze when I first spotted him. At first glance, I figured it was a deer or maybe a stray dog, something moving between the trees. But then this figure stepped out of the tree line, and it hit me. It was a man. He looked rough, almost feral. His clothes were ripped and caked in dirt, his hair a tangled, matted mess. He just stood there for a second, and I wondered if he was lost, or maybe in some kind of trouble. But then he started running. Not jogging, not stumbling. Running. Straight towards my house, head down, fists pumping like he was charging into battle. My stomach plummeted, and I froze for a split second, my brain struggling to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. This wasn't some lost hiker. This was something else entirely. I snapped out of it and bolted inside, slamming the back door and fumbling with the deadbolt, my hands shaking like crazy. My heart was pounding in my ears, but there was no time to think. I tore through the house, locking every door and window I could find. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "Someone's trying to break into my house," I blurted to the operator. "He's running right at me. He just came out of the woods." "Stay calm," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Is he still outside?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaky. "I don't think he's reached the house yet." And that's when I heard it. A faint creak of a floorboard. But it wasn't coming from the porch. It was inside the house. A cold wave of dread washed over me. My basement stairs have this telltale creak when someone steps on them. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This guy was already inside. I moved cautiously toward the hallway where the basement door was. It was cracked open, just enough for me to see the dark, descending stairwell. That's when I remembered the basement windows. They're small and easy to miss, and they've never latched properly. I'd been meaning to fix them for months, but, life gets in the way. My mind raced. Had he broken in last night? Had he been lurking in my house the whole time? I told the operator what I'd heard. She kept telling me to stay calm, to stay safe, to lock myself in a room if I could, but there was no way I was just going to hide, not knowing he was in there with me. I grabbed my shotgun from the hall closet. I keep it loaded with non-lethal rounds, rock salt and rubber bullets. for scaring off coyotes or the occasional stray dog. I quickly checked the barrel. Rock salt, rubber bullets, and then that last chilling shell, live buckshot. I never expected to actually need that one. The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs. My pulse was going wild. I could feel it throbbing in my temples. The basement door creaked open, and he stepped into the hallway. He was huge, even bigger than I'd realized when I first saw him outside. Broad shoulders, arms hanging loose at his sides. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, fixed on me. He didn't say a word. He just started walking towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural, like some kind of puppet. "Stop!" I yelled, raising the shotgun. "Don't come any closer." He didn't even flinch. The first shot hit him square in the chest. Rock salt. It should have stung like crazy, stopped him dead in his tracks. But he didn't even seem to register it. He just kept coming, his lips twisting into this grotesque grin. I fired again, this time with a rubber bullet. It knocked him back a step, but that twisted grin didn't budge. He let out this low, guttural growl, something primal, not even human, and then he lunged. I had no choice. The third shot was live buckshot. It tore into his chest, and blood splattered against the walls. He staggered, his breath catching in his throat, but he still didn't stop. I fired again, and this time, he finally went down, but even then, he was crawling towards me. I stumbled back, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But he was too fast. He grabbed my legs, pulling me down with him. We hit the floor hard, his weight pinning me down, his hands clawing at my arms and chest. I could feel his hot, ragged breath on my face, smell the blood and sweat. I honestly thought that was it. I thought he was going to kill me. Then, just as suddenly as he'd attacked, he just stopped. His body went limp, and I managed to shove him off. He collapsed onto the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, a pool of blood spreading beneath him, seeping into the cracks between the floorboards. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, still clutching the shotgun. I could hear the distant wail of sirens growing louder. The police arrived minutes later, guns drawn, and swept through the house. But there was no one else. The 911 operator had heard everything. The gunshots, the shouting, the struggle, and had gotten him there as fast as possible. Later, they told me who he was. He'd escaped from a mental hospital in Baltimore, about 50 miles away. He'd broken out days before and somehow made his way to my house. The police think he found that faulty basement window and climbed in during the night, hiding there until morning. The investigation cleared me. Self-defense, they said. But that didn't make it any easier. The thought of him down there, just beneath my feet, still creeps me out. Sometimes I wonder if I'd just checked the basement the night before. Maybe I could have prevented all of it. Maybe he'd still be alive. I fixed the basement window and replaced the door lock, but I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe here again. Some things just leave a mark.